This way we will have the videos, at least the recording started. Laura, if you'd like to go ahead, we will.
Yeah,
I've
got just 9:30. I'm going to just wait till,
okay,
another minute.
gotcha.
Since we've got people clicking in now.
I'm going to throw the agenda up on the board if I can get it to correctly work with me here. Oh, I need to take back the presenter role. No wonder.
All right, I guess we'll go ahead and start. It's time. Thank you all for attending today. We appreciate your interest, your participation. We're looking forward to hearing our speakers today. I would like to remind everybody that if you go to our website, which is www.ncp3a.org, the videos from our conference in May are posted there for you to enjoy in case you missed them or want to see them again. And also our membership application can be accessed from that website. It is time for annual memberships again. The form is there and you can pay either by PayPal or mail a check in. Either way, whatever works for you. But it is time for our membership to swing out again. So that being said, thank you all for attending again. And I'm going to turn it over to Laura Slobach, who is our secretary.
Oops. Bear with me, Laura. I got to stop sharing the screen so I can make you the presenter again. Come on, Laura. There. See if you can share, Laura.
No, not yet. I tried to reclaim the host role too, but it asked me for a code.
Oh, no.
So we see you now, though, Laura.
Laura, you should now be a presenter. So see if you can now.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
Let me see if I can make them a little larger.
That's good.
On your screen, you should be able, on the left side of the screen, you should be able to zoom in as well, folks, if you need to.
So these are our meeting minutes from the annual conference and the annual meeting. It was a fairly short meeting, so the actual minutes aren't that long, but just for a quick reference, I did attach the conference flyer and agenda, the treasurer's report, the budget estimate, and the NCPAAA annual report. Also, if I did just copy and paste those documents, so the formatting isn't exactly correct, but you can access all the documents on our website, ncp3a.org. Fun side note, there were 323 individuals who registered, and out of those folks who registered, 265 total attendees were at the conference, which we think was a really, really, really great number. But here's the meeting minutes. Happy to make any corrections or additions if I missed anything.
I'm sorry, Laura, did you say that those minutes are available on the website or no?
I normally don't post them or
okay.
until they're approved.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
But I can post them there if folks want to take a look. And then if you see any corrections that need to be made, I can switch it out.
Okay, do we have a motion to accept the minutes as written?
I so move.
All right,
Second.
Ann, second by Pam. Thank you all so much. We'll move on to our treasurer's report. Pam Palmer, take it away.
Okay, the first report will be as of June 30th, 2021. We started our balance with $15,991.01. We have the reserve of $3,000, so we have access to $12,991.01. Our membership dues, we had a total of $610 last year. We had conference sponsorships, AARP 3,500, North Carolina SHIP 3,000, North Carolina Coalition on Aging 150, so total sponsorships of 6,500. So total income last year was $7,110. We had expenses, conference expense, $3,578.85. Our website was 96. Post Office 168. We joined the North Carolina Coalition on Aging for $200. We sponsored their conference for $150. PayPal expenses of $7.31. Total expenses of $4,200.16. Our balance as of June 30th was $15,900.85. So as of the treasurer's report for today, July 21st, we started our balance with $18,900.85 less $3,000 reserve. We have membership dues at this time of $150. We've had expense our website $96 and PayPal expense of $3.09. So our balance as of today is $15,951.76. As of right now, we have one organization member. It's Martin County Department of Social Services, and we have 7 individual members.
Thank you, Pam. Can I get a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
I will make that motion.
Thank you.
I will
Second?
second.
Thank you, Autumn and John. I'd also like to just take a minute. I know that most of you attending know the executive committee here for the partnership. We've been around for a while, but we do have a new member on our executive committee, and that's Allison Crossman. Hey, Allison, welcome aboard. Allison is going to be one of our communications co-chairs. And I don't know if any of you all know this or not, but Allison was the IT genius behind our conference this year. So we're really pleased to have her on board, along with all her skills and knowledge. Welcome, Allison. All right, I'm going to turn it over now to Ann Elmore. Ann is going to tell us about our speakers.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the North Carolina Partnership to Address Adult Abuse, I am Ann Elmore, and it is our pleasure to bring you today's session on the Disability Rights North Carolina contribution to our social safety net. Speaking today are Education Committee Co-Chair Tadra Martin, whose day job is as a supervising attorney with Disability Rights North Carolina. With DRNC since 2015, Tadra leads the intake team, focusing on ensuring high-quality information and referral services and timely responses to service requests. Luke Woolard is a lawyer focused on criminal justice matters. Luke joined DRNC's Prison and Jails team in January of 2019. Larkin Taylor, also a DRNC attorney since 2017, Larkin will address guardianships and conservatorships, including the Britney Spears scenario many of us have been reading about in the news. Tadra.
And Tadra, you should be able to unmute yourself, and I have made you a presenter so you can share any PowerPoints if you need to.
Okay, I just muted myself. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Anne, for such a lovely introduction. And so I think I'm going to share some information with how disability rights helps people in North Carolina. And then Larkin is going to come in and talk to you a little bit, like Anne said, about guardianship and the Britney Spears, what's going on with that current event. And then Luke is going to finish up and talk about some of the work that our criminal justice team is doing. So I plan to share with you my screen so you can see my presentation. So let's see if this works. Okay. Oops, that one.
Tadra, I just want to mention I do not see Larkin Taylor Parkin in the list of attendees to make a panelist. I have made Luke a panelist.
Larkin may join us a little later. We have also at this very same time on our all-staff meeting. And so they may be in our all-staff meeting right now. But
Luke is on, but I'll keep a watch out for Larkin then. Thank you.
Yeah, she may join around probably maybe around 10 o'clock. Our all-staff meeting started at the same time at 9:30. So can you all see my screen? Can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
We can see your notes section too, so you might need to put it on presentation mode.
I thought it was on presentation mode.
If you're using multiple screens, you may need to change your screen.
Multiple screens, but okay, I got it now. So bear with me, you all. So where are you?
I had the same issue this morning, Tadra. I ended up having to share the screen where the PowerPoint actually came up on instead of the one where the notes were at, just to let you know.
Yeah, and so I only use WebEx when I'm meeting with this group, and so usually we use every other time we use Zoom. So I don't know how to stop.
Yeah. So if you bring your notes back over, just stop sharing your screen, and then go back and share screen, and then share the one where the actual file was coming up without the notes. Share that screen, and then it will.
All right.
Go for
So I'm gonna try to multitask here, and so because I know we are limited for time, but one of the things with disability rights is that we are what we call the PNA, or the Protection and Advocacy Agency for the state of North Carolina. Every U.S. territory has one, and there are 57 throughout the country and the U.S. territories. And we were created out of a case called Willowbrook back in the 1970s. All right, so I pulled it up, and now I have lost you guys. There you go. Okay. All right. Okay, can you see it now? Can y'all see my screen now?
No.
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. So.
Yes, now you're starting to share.
Yeah, and for some reason it wants to. Yeah, you can share my notes. It's okay. I think y'all just might have to. Y'all may just have to try it one more time to see if it works.
And I'm typing a message in the chat for everyone to let you know that if you have any questions during the presentations, so please type them in the chat area, but we will get to those questions as soon as we can.
Yeah. I don't know why it Why is doing that? Fine. But nevertheless, now I've lost you all.
Patrick, could you possibly just email Kevin the PowerPoint real quick and see if he could share it?
Maybe if I can't even get back to my if I can even just get back to my whatchamacall screen.
You may have to go at the very top and do the stop sharing. I don't know if it went up there for you. And then start sharing again. Audra, are you still there? We may have lost Audra.
Kevin, I will ask her to log back on.
Yeah. Luke, I see that you're on. You want to unmute, and would you like to say anything while we're getting Audra back on the phone with us or on the webinar?
Sure. I guess I'd be happy to start in if we can't get Tadra back. I think she was probably going to explain that, she already said protection advocacy is in every U.S. state and territory. It was started as part of the ADA. We are unique in that we have monitoring access to many different state facilities. From my end, that includes pretty unparalleled access to jails and prisons, and that's to investigate and bring any claims that we need to advocate for the rights of folks with disabilities in those facilities. Of course, those facilities also include hospitals, long-term care homes, things of that nature. I know we both engage in individual representation of folks who have ADA claims, whether it's at their work, for us in jails and prisons, or at any of these facilities. We also engage in sort of statewide policy work, trying to advocate for the rights of folks with disabilities. We are our own nonprofit. We were originally way back before my time, part of the governor's office. And then it was sort of decided that we could do our job of advocating much better if we were our own separate nonprofit. So while we are mandated to exist by the ADA, we are sort of separate and not a government agency, which works out well because at least on the criminal justice team, we often end up advocating to, or sometimes, as was the case with our recent COVID lawsuit, suing the executive branch. So it's sort of better that we are a separate entity. I am not really
and Luke,
sure.
I see Tadra is back on. So,
Okay.
And Tadra, I made you a presenter if you want to try to share your screen again. Or
I think, Kevin, I sent it to you because I don't know what
Gotcha.
happened. Like my.
I'm checking my email.
So thank you so much, Luke, for filling in with me while I got kicked out the meeting and I don't know what was going on. I did send it to Kevin, and maybe Kevin can share it, and then I'll start. I heard Luke mention about the PNA and being ADA, so I'm not sure what. So I'll just kind of pick up about the Protection and Advocacy Agency, and kind of we started from this case in Willowbrook that Geraldo Rivera did in the 1970s that investigated. Willowbrook was essentially a hospital for individuals who had intellectual developmental disabilities, and that's what we call developmental tiers. We call them developmental centers here in North Carolina, and all the abuse and neglect that was going on that was uncovered by that investigative report Congress to create the protection and advocacy system. And so, like I said, every U.S. state and territory has one. And so one of the main superpowers that what we call that we have is our access authority. Because we were created about Willowbrook, the core of what the PNA and all PNAs are to investigate abuse, to monitor for abuse and neglect, and investigate allegations of abuse and neglect in facilities and hospitals. There's our core function. But from that, what we call it here at Disability Rights North Carolina, all our other teams branched off from that. And so we have several teams that work on multiple targets. And if I'm going too fast, let me know, or if I jumped around, let me know, or Luke, if I forgot anything, please let me know. And so we do all our work in targets, all our work in teams, and each team has a particular target. And so
Tadra, are you seeing this PowerPoint?
I do see the PowerPoint. I absolutely do. So if you could, Kevin, go to, I think Luke probably talked about the PNA and the origins of the system. And so if you could skip to slide 6, that would be great. Our mission and vision.
There you go.
Yeah. So as you see, this is our mission and vision, is to protect the legal rights of individuals with disabilities in North Carolina. And again, as I was saying, that started from, we do have our investigation and monitoring team, and that has branched out to the other teams that we have. Kevin, can you go down to slide number 9, legally based advocacy we provide? Yeah. So talk about monitoring. We monitor all the state operated facilities in North Carolina, as well as the developmental centers. We also monitor at what we call PRTFs, which are psychiatric residential treatment facilities. And with our superpower, which is within our I&M team, we have access authority, which is to go into any particular institution and see and meet and talk with those who are there, who are records and things like that. And also, not to leave Luke out, they also have this access authority in our jails and prisons. I think that's right. Is that right, Luke?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. We also have it in our jails and prisons. So essentially, what our I&M team does in psychiatric hospitals, developmental centers, nursing homes, PRTF, Luke and his team does in jails and prisons, and they have that same authority to go in whenever they can or want to. And also we talked about monitoring. One of the things we do at Disability Rights is we promote community and independent living. So when we are monitoring for abuse and neglect, we are also monitoring to identify individuals who want to transition out of the facility and into the community. So that is one of the core functions of the PNA. Another core function of the PNA, Kevin, if you could move down to slide 13. Yes, thanks. Is information and referral. And so this is what falls under my team or our intake team, which we call our Client Assistance Services and Engagement team, but we call it CASE for short. And so essentially what my team does is we are the gateway into the organization. So we screen calls to determine if an individual is eligible for our services, and if they are eligible, what level of service can we provide them. To be eligible for our services, you have to have a disability. And once we screen for that, if you have an issue in an area where we do not practice, then we will give you information and referral. And some of the areas where we don't practice is we don't practice bankruptcy law, wills and estates. We don't typically practice family law unless it is a case where it is related to a disability, i.e., someone is trying to take custody of someone's child because the parent has a disability, or they don't think the parent should have custody because the parent has a disability. We don't do Social Security disability law. We get a lot of calls for people wanting us to help them get Social Security disability. We don't do that at all. We typically don't do personal injury or malpractice law, and we don't do criminal law. Although Luke and Susie are our criminal justice team, they don't actually practice criminal law, so to speak. Although they do kind of intermingle, I would say, with the criminal law system sometimes, and Luke may correct me now or when he gives his presentation, but so if they get information referral, or if they're in a area where we don't practice, or if they're not within a target area. If the caller has an issue that's within a target area, then they get a higher level of service. Kevin, can you move down to slide 14? We start to talk about our targets. So targets are essentially, we call them targets. Other organizations may call them priorities, but essentially we think target probably just sounds better than a priority, but nevertheless, each year we identify areas to focus on, and when we do that, when we create our targets, we seek input from the community, people with disabilities, other organizations, and what have you, about what needs to happen in the disability community, and what things should we be looking at that we may not have seen the previous year. Can you go to the next slide, Kevin? Slide 15. So our targets. So as I said, that we do our work in teams, and each team has a target. So you see from these targets, we have a special education team. We have a community integration team that does employment law, and they do community access law, which are you seeing as target 3 and target 4. Can you move down to the next slide, Kevin? Target 5 would start what I talked about, PRTF. Target 6 is what we would call, that's also part of our community integration team, but that's Medicaid law. And I think what's important I'm going to stop and note with Medicaid, and I'll talk about this a little more when we get to talk about some of the differences between disability rights and legal aid, is that with disability rights, we practice a very niche area of Medicaid law. And essentially, I said earlier that we identify people, or we promote community and independent living. A lot of people who are institutions, for them to live in the community, they have to do so. They need the help of Medicaid services. So our Medicaid team essentially makes sure that individuals get the services that they need so they can live in their community. And so that's what our Medicaid generally is what we practice. We don't do Medicaid eligibility and things like that. And then we have, of course, also a part of our community integration team is we do some housing law, and I'll talk about the differences between the housing law that we do, the difference in the housing law that we do versus that legal aid does. Kevin, can you move to the next slide? Target 8, we have a disaster target. We have a disaster recovery team that was essentially created out of the hurricanes that hit North Carolina. I think it started with Hurricane Matthew, and then it really became into formation with Hurricane Florence. And also our disaster team is also our team that works on a lot of our pandemic effort, or a lot of our response to the pandemic, especially when it comes to outreach. I mean, the pandemic has affected all of our teams, but it also is some of the work that our disaster team does. Like last week, they went to Gates County, and Governor Cooper went down there with them with their project. I think it's Project Access regarding the COVID vaccine. Target 9 is our criminal justice team, and then target 10 is what Larkin would talk about. That's guardianship, and then also we have target 11 regarding making sure people with disabilities have the right to vote, and those rights are being properly enforced. Next slide, please. Also, I'm just going to go over this kind of quickly, is we have a representative payee team. And essentially, they do reviews of Social Security rep payees. Oftentimes, those payees are facilities and things of that nature, but that and so they investigate, look at records and things like that to see if there's any abuse and neglect regarding rep payees, especially when it deals with funds. Are there any questions? I feel like I went through that very quickly. Are there any questions for me? Okay. So I'm going to
Audrey,
go.
let me check the chat box to see if there's some questions. I'm sorry, with me handling all the screens, I had to.
That's all right. I see one from Ann Elmore, and she wondered did the monitoring and access work during pandemic restrictions, Todd?
So during the pandemic, we did a lot of our monitoring virtually. We did virtual monitoring, as that was determined, I think, to be the safest for those who may be in institution and those who are going in there outside of institutions. I think that's how we changed. As far as, so if we had the need to go into an institution or a facility, I don't know that we could have necessarily been kept out of. But certainly the pandemic was unprecedented. And so it was a steep learning curve, I think, for all of us, and trying to figure out what we could do and what we couldn't do. But most of the monitoring that was done during that time was virtual monitoring that they did, and they did with video and camera and things of that nature.
Todd, we do have another question. This actually comes from Nancy Warren. Is DRNC's monitoring different than and in addition to state and federal monitoring for licensure compliance?
It is. It is different. So for us, our monitoring is pretty much regarding state facilities and even state jails and prisons. And Luke can maybe answer more about the federal prisons and how they may be monitored, if they're monitored. I don't know. But as far as so for us, what a monitoring may look like, or the investigation of abuse and neglect, if we go to a facility and we see some issues going on, some things that they have are not in compliance, then we report that. Then we will file a report to the Division of Health Services Regulations, and dependent upon those allegations, those issues that are going on there, it may necessitate filing a lawsuit maybe against the state for their failure to enforce state law or being compliant and things like in that type of thing. Does that answer your question, Nancy?
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, I just wanted to be clear that the monitoring that DRNC does is different than, and it's in a much different kind of quote monitoring than what you might expect from other entities that have the obligation to do monitoring. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, yes, it is different. It is different. And if we see any violations there, we do report it to the appropriate state agency or division. And depending upon what their response is, we go from there. Like I said, it may be suing the state or helping the state or however that may go. But I think at the end of the day is to make sure that individuals who want to live in facilities can do so without abuse and neglect. And for those who don't want to live in facilities or institutions, then they have the right to live in the community, and making sure that right is being enforced.
Todd, we have a couple more questions.
Okay.
Does DRNC have the capacity to assist parents with a disability whose children have been placed in the foster care system due to dependency?
If we have the capacity to help, I know that is
parents. Yep.
To assist parents. So that is more of a team-related question. That will be a part of our community integration team. I will tell you that, to my knowledge, in the past, we have not handled such cases because I want to say it's not related to disability, but that has not been, I think, it's something that they have looked into regarding their target areas or even their focus areas. I think if that's something that the community needs, I think that team will happily look into it and see how they can help with that, given our guidelines. And also, what I will say is that, and I did not say this, is that we receive most of our funding through federal grants. So we, like all of the PNAs, receive our fundings through federal grants that are given to us by Congress. So,
Okay.
the work that we do has to be also in line with those.
Gotcha. And the final question I have for you comes up is, do you collaborate with Legal Aid North Carolina regarding issues like housing, et cetera, and do you partner with DV agencies?
Okay. So yeah, so Kevin, if you could go to the slide, the next slide, slide 21.
There you go. Okay. Oh, 21. Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Yes, DRNC and Legal Aid of North Carolina. So there are a lot of similarities between Legal Aid and Disability Rights North Carolina DRNC, but two of them are, one, we both are agencies that serve the entire state of North Carolina, and although we practice in some of the same areas, we really try to work together to expand our reach and services because there are not nearly enough public interest lawyers and law firms and things like that to go around. We try not to duplicate services if we don't have to. So for instance, some of the areas where we are the same are housing. We both practice housing law. We both practice education and employment, as well as in Medicaid. And so when I said that our eligibility criteria is that you have a disability, Legal Aid's eligibility criteria is income-based. You have to meet the income limits. And I think at one time, I can't remember, it's a certain percentage of the poverty level that you have to meet. And because a lot of people who have disabilities are also low income, we often find ourselves serving the same clients. And so one of the ways that we differentiate our work, especially in housing and pretty much all our work, the rights violation that you're experiencing has to be related to your disability. So for example, with housing law, a housing case may be within target for us if the landlord is denying a reasonable accommodation or is evicting someone for their disability. Whereas legal aid may handle a case where the issue may be payment of rent or where the landlord alleges that the tenant has breached their lease for a reason not related to their disability. And so while legal aid may, be able to help with the landlord denying a reasonable accommodation, oftentimes they would send that case to us. And if we get a case where the tenant is an issue with payment or an allegation of non-payment, we will send that to legal aid, especially if the client or the person does not have a disability or if the reason for non-payment is not related to disability. It's like, and I told you earlier with Medicaid law, we practice essentially services, getting individual services in the community to make sure so they don't have to live in an institution if they don't want to. Whereas legal aid does a lot of Medicaid eligibility. Certainly, they may do some what we call some personal services type cases, some PCS cases, but that's ways we try to expand our reach. So we will refer, like if a Medicaid eligibility case comes into us, we'll refer it to legal aid. And if legal aid gets a service denial case, then they will refer it to us. So those are some areas where we overlap. And with appointment law is is similar. Like if someone has an employment issue that is not related to their disability, we will send that to legal aid or the ACLU. The ACLU, of course, there's a lot of employment discrimination based on the other protected classes. And if they get an employment case that they believe is based on disability, they will send it to us. Also, legal aid does a lot of unemployment law. So if someone has been denied unemployment, legal aid would do that case. And if we get those cases, we send it to legal aid. We don't typically do unemployment cases. Also, in areas that are different is legal aid, they do, and because legal aid is a bigger organization, they're a bigger law firm. I think legal aid is the 4th largest law firm in the state. And so they also do wills and directives, largely through their senior law project. They'll do in bankruptcy law, consumer law, domestic violence, immigration, expulsion. But the thing that both of us have in common is neither of us practices criminal law. So I kind of went through that, and there is a lot of overlap, and sometimes we can do it, or legal aid can do it, and a lot of it for those cases that overlap is, okay, who has the capacity to do it, who is best suited to do it, and sometimes it comes to those questions. So, any questions about disability rights and legal aid, or any of the differences?
Carter, the only other question that someone is asking is if we will be able to share the slides through the website. Will you allow us to post them?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I sent a PDF copy to Autumn earlier today.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
And just to let you know, I do see Larkin Taylor Parker. I have made Larkin a panelist as well, and I know Luke is already on, so just want to let you know that.
Audra, this is Laura. I have a question.
Yes.
Can Adult Protective Services make a referral to you guys for exploitation by a payee?
Yes, they can. They can they can contact us, my team, and then we will get in touch with our rep payee team, and they usually will take it from there and look into that. Absolutely. So anytime you feel like if there's any type of, absolutely, feel free to refer those to us.
Okay. And another question, sort of a general question, is how often do you all find yourselves working with local departments of social services, adult protective services?
Not as much as you may think.
Yeah.
Not as much as you may think. And to my knowledge, I have not. And I'll be honest, Larkin, that may be a good segue into Larkin, because Larkin may have given their work in guardianship, done that more than I have. I'm not sure, and I don't want to put them on the spot in that way. But I know in my practice and from my knowledge, probably not as much as what a lot of people may think. I'm not sure why that is, but.
I have a question too. It's Laura Slava. So it sounds like you or folks from your team might do a lot of advocacy for folks in group facilities. So maybe a skilled nursing facility or a group home. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how does it look if you come across someone who's interested in living independently, but maybe their needs are higher than what like a home life could support?
So I think it depends upon whether, first, if they have high needs, then that probably is looking into a waiver, some type of one of the 3 waivers in North Carolina, and seeing if they meet the criteria for that waiver, that particular waiver. So if we want to say if they're CAP DA, right, a waiver for a lot of people who have physical disabilities, and to see with those waivers, each waiver has a budget and if they can be served under that budget, and also, whether they may have friends or family members that can provide services, whether they can afford to pay for private services outside of Medicaid. So I do think it depends on what services can be available to them and their budget as to whether or not the person can be served in the community or not.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And we have another question. Anne asked, how exactly should APS make referrals to DRNC?
I think they should call and talk to someone on my team, the client services team. Like I said, that's the gateway to the organization. And so I think, once they make that referral to us, and then we'll reach out to the other teams and, we'll evaluate it to see, and then we'll reach out to the other teams to, see, okay, what can we do here, if anything, and things like that. So I think that's the first way right now, is to just contact our intake team, and then we will go from there.
And do you have that information on how to contact you in your presentation, just further down?
I think, yes, I have it on I think in our presentation, and I don't think I didn't ask Kevin to show the slide, but we do, but it is in the yes, Kevin has it. So that's it, is how to contact us. I think what's not up there, and also it's not showing there, but it's showing on this slide on my computer, but it also has our website. And so you can also fill out an online application to submit to us. Also, we provide technical assistance. So if APS is calling us, or someone from DSS is calling us, we may provide them with some level of technical assistance for them. But that's the best way to do it, is do an online application. You can call us, one of those two ways. But I can send you, if it's not showing, I'll make sure I send to on our website. And on our website, we also have a lot of more information about the work that we do and the resources that we have. We have a pretty extensive resource library on our website right now that can answer many questions, not all, but many, or at least get people pointed in the right direction.
Hey, Todra, we do have a question, and they're asking, can you all come and do a presentation with DSS agencies? And this is from Angela Ellis.
Sure, we can. We definitely can. You can contact us. You can send me an email. So if you can send me an email or send us an email through our website, I can provide you with my email address. Oh, I see what Pam has was the best way for a resident in a facility to reach you if they do not have access to a computer. I think in those situations, if they have access to a phone, then that is probably the best way, is to call us. If they don't have access to a phone or a computer, then we would need to know maybe where they are, and so we would probably maybe send someone out there to see them in person or monitor, because that's, if they don't have access to a communication, some way to communicate to us, then that may be an issue.
Todra, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat at this time.
All right, so I turn it over to Larkin.
And Larkin, you can unmute your phone. And Larkin, do you have any PowerPoint or anything that you wish to show? I can make you a panelist or a presenter.
I don't. I have some notes that I sent in.
Okay. Go ahead.
So go ahead and get started. And I'll try to keep this quick and conversational. I know we're all on Zoom a lot these days. But I heard that you all were interested in some of the issues surrounding Britney Spears and her conservatorship. So I'll just start with the basics. Guardianship is what we call it. It's called conservatorship in California, where Britney Spears is a legal arrangement, and it's a state law matter. So it's a little bit different in every state, but here in North Carolina, at least, the idea is that the decision-making power over a range of life decisions, but usually all of them is taken from one person and given to another person. That's all guardianship is. It's a court taking one person's decision-making power over their life and giving it to somebody else. Guardianship doesn't necessarily mean financial support. It's not an assurance that someone is going to get treatment or adequate housing. It doesn't mean that someone is definitely going to get services. It doesn't necessarily mean protection from going to jail or getting sued. There can be some complexity and some nuance around some of that, but there are people who have guardians in North Carolina's prisons and jails. It's not necessarily protection from ever making a bad decision or being harmed or getting into trouble. And guardianship can sometimes, doesn't always save people from abuse and neglect, and can sometimes be a vehicle for abuse and neglect. We've definitely all heard stories about things that have happened in other states, guardianship scandals where predatory guardianships were being imposed on people who didn't need them and used to just loot people's assets. And some of us have probably seen the movie I Care a Lot, really sensationalistic and weird, but that's kind of the premise, and the kernel of truth in there comes out of situations that happened in places like Nevada that had a big predatory guardianship problem for a while. You can Google the name April Parks if you want to learn more about that. A sad but kind of an interesting story. So guardianship isn't being sheltered from all of life's harms or protected from some of our very complicated and tricky service systems that don't always serve people very well. And what guardianship is one of the most severe restrictions on civil rights that our legal system can do to a person. Someone who has a guardian is probably going to have fewer rights than someone who has left prison after being convicted of a felony. People with disabilities have criticized guardianship for a while because it's too restrictive for a lot of people's needs. This is a big restriction in civil rights that we really shouldn't be imposing on people at any time when we don't have to. And for many people, less restrictive alternatives would work, but the public is not always very educated on those less restrictive alternatives, or on the fact that guardianship isn't a magic bullet that's going to fix everyone's problems, and isn't risk-free. So at DRNC, we see a lot of guardianships that are getting in the way of people living the lives they want without necessarily keeping them safer. And we see guardianship creating a double standard for people with disabilities. A lot of us are allowed to make a certain number of bad decisions. We can choose to eat things that are not good for us, or spend money in ways that some people might not think was good, or, I don't know, wear shorts in cold weather. If you have a disability, though, especially if it's an intellectual or developmental disability or a mental health disability, things like not making the healthiest food choices, or dating someone that your family doesn't like, or wearing shorts in December, things that lots of people have done, might be grounds for a guardianship And this means that people with disabilities are actually in some ways held to a higher standard of capacity and can't be mildly irresponsible in the little ways that everybody is all the time that make life rich and colorful and fun. Guardianship is definitely overused in North Carolina, and we see too many counties where petitions are rubber stamped, and this is not treated like the serious civil rights issue that it is. People don't stop and consider the risks of guardianship, the harms of guardianship, and ask the question, is there another way we could meet this person's needs and help this person make good decisions and stay safe? Or good enough decisions. A life of making only perfectly good decisions might be kind of dull. A lot of states have these issues. North Carolina is not alone, and there's a national movement to reform guardianship and use less guardianship, replace it with the alternatives in every situation where we can. And a lot of that happens through WINGS groups, that's Working Interdisciplinary Network of Guardianship Stakeholders groups. North Carolina has one. There are meetings. Anybody is free to come, and we love to hear from different stakeholders and make sure we've got every perspective in the room so that any change that we're able to make will actually work well in real life. And where Free Britney comes into all of this is that at this moment, when people are thinking about guardianship, thinking about whether it's the best solution in many different situations, we've got this high-profile guardianship case playing out. I think Britney Spears has been under conservatorship since 2008, which means that she's had things in her life ranging from big stuff like her money and her reproductive decisions. She alleges that she's not been allowed to remove an ID, to smaller things, but things that matter in the great scheme of a person's life, like I think the color of her cabinet. All of that's been under the control of other people. It seems as though, from what we can see now that we're getting an account from Spears of what her life is like, that she's not liking this. She may want to move in the direction of ending her conservatorship, and she definitely wants to remove her father from his role. It's unclear what will happen with this case going forward, whether she'll ever leave conservatorship, whether or not she'll be successful in permanently removing her father from his role in managing her affairs. But she was recently allowed to pick her own lawyer, which is a really basic right that most people have in our system. I mean, for everyone, it's affected by ability to pay. But generally, we really favor letting people pick their own counsel. And it's a big deal that she's gotten this back and she can use her resources to select the lawyer of her choice. What's maybe even bigger is that people who don't think about these issues, who don't think about people with disabilities and older people every day, are talking about guardianship issues in a way that I've never seen before. This is sparking national discussions that may lead to further reform and further conversations among individuals and families about what people's wishes are if they ever find that their capacity to make decisions for themselves is becoming more limited. That's all I had to say. Does anyone have questions?
Larkin, we do have a question that has been typed in, and it says, how do third parties know? And then, had the Britney Spears conservatorship not been in the news, surely few would suspect someone else was the decision maker for her.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part.
Basically, with Ann Elmore is asking, how do third parties know? I guess, how do the third parties know about the conservatorship? And Ann, if you want to unmute, you can ask.
Yeah, Larkin. One thing that is a puzzler is when you have adults who, you know, in their normal course of things, we come across adults with a wide range of capabilities. Almost none of them are under guardianships or conservatorships. So what's to put some third party on notice that this person has a guardian or conservator who makes their decisions for them?
Well, let's remember, guardianship is a really, really severe restriction in rights. The default assumption always needs to be this adult does not have a guardian. We're going to presume capacity. We're going to presume competence. We're going to listen to the person that we're talking to. Sometimes, if that adult is if the adult can communicate in words, you can ask. And generally, people have been pretty quick to tell me point blank, yeah, I have a guardian, if they do. So a lot of times, if the person can communicate with you, just asking is the way to go. If the person can't communicate or they're not sure or it's unclear, if somebody is unsure, I start asking questions about who manages your money, who a lot of times you can dig into it and figure it out through a conversation with the person. Things get harder when the person can't communicate. But if someone comes to me and alleges that they're someone's guardian, what I say is, show me the papers, prove it to me. And I completely disregard anything they say about being guardian until they can show me letters from a court proving they are. Because in the same way that I wouldn't say turn over client information that has to be kept confidential to a third party until I knew that I had the consent of the client. You default to working with the person, you default to listening to the person in front of you, you default to protecting the person's privacy and assuming that the person has their legal rights. And someone who wants to assert otherwise needs to show some evidence that they have some right to do that. I'm not just going to take somebody's word that they're guardian. And I've definitely seen situations where someone claimed to be a legal guardian and wasn't. So just don't take anyone's word for it. If you really need to look and you're really at your wit's end, if you can find out the counties that the person has lived in, you may be able to go to those courthouses, and guardianships are matters of public record. So anybody can walk in off the street and pull court files. Where this gets tricky is when a person has moved around. In North Carolina, guardianship files only exist at the courthouse where the guardianship happened as a paper file. So if somebody has lived in many different counties and I'm trying to help them with a guardianship matter, there are times when I may have to drive around to a bunch of different courthouses and look. It's not always easy to figure out, but I think that we all have to default to presuming competence and there's not a guardian until proven otherwise.
So Larkin, contracts then are voidable if the individual operates as though there is no guardianship and individuals contract with them for housing purposes, for delivery of various services. Then what I hear you saying basically is that until somebody comes up and says, this person did not have the capacity to enter into this contract, they were under a guardianship, and then the contract would be voidable. Is that the way it's working?
I'm not sure because I don't see those issues. I've never seen those issues come up, actually. Um, I would have to check, and that may be something to talk through with a lawyer for your own organization if you have a specific question. But I think it's entirely possible that there are people walking around who have a guardian and people interacting with them might not know it. And that's probably, again, a sign that we're overusing guardianship. If an individual is able to go out and make contracts to meet their needs, it's confusing to me that that person has a guardian in the first place. And if these situations are coming up in your work, that's probably a symptom of how overused guardianship is in our state.
So do you actually assist individuals with the lifting of guardianships, the termination of guardianships?
We do, and as far as I know, we're the only organization in the state that will do that for people free of charge. Unfortunately, that means that we don't have the capacity to do that for everyone who calls us. But if you run into an individual who wants to get out of a guardianship, you can always make that referral, have them call our intake, and we rarely turn anybody away without at least some information and advice. At times, we are able to give people legal representation in restoration proceedings, yes.
Awesome. That is the only, because that's the final question that we have in the chat area for you. Okay. So I guess we're turning it over to Luke at this time. And Luke, I will make you presenter. We'll see if you are able to share your screen. And if you need me to, I got the PowerPoints ready for you.
Okay, great. Let me give it a shot here. Okay, let me see. Start the slideshow.
If you want to make it bigger, you can. There we go.
Yeah. And I can't see what y'all see. Are you seeing the actual slideshow, or is it the
I see
Notes.
your notes. I see your
my
notes there.
notes? All right, so how about now?
Now that's perfect.
Great. Okay, so as Todger said, I'm Luke Woolard. I am one of two people on our Disability Rights North Carolina criminal justice team. It is Susan Pollitt, who is my supervising attorney, who has been doing this work for a very long time and was solo until about beginning of 2019 when I came on as the staff attorney. So what we do is advocate for all justice-involved people with disabilities. And I'm used to saying recently, but I suppose it was about a year and a half ago now, our target, those targets Tadra was talking about, expanded. Used to be we could really only help folks who were in facilities, jails or prisons, and now we are helping folks throughout the entire process. So basically, from their first interaction with law enforcement, all the way through, hopefully they don't end up in a facility, but if they do, we can help them with disability issues there, and then we help folks who are re-entering, rejoining their communities after incarceration. We do that both through working with individuals to make sure that the facilities that they're in are giving them proper ADA accommodations, that the conditions are humane, that they're getting adequate access to health care. And we also advocate for policy change at a state level with advocacy both at the legislature and in the executive branch. So we also provide self-advocacy tools. As I said, we are two people, so often someone will call us needing help, and the best and honestly quickest way that they are going to get help for them, or very often it's a family member who's incarcerated, is for us to give them the tools to advocate for themselves. Many folks just honestly need to know what their rights are, how the system works, and who they can call. And often we can provide that with them and they can advocate for themselves. We will also from time to time provide amicus briefs to the court. What that means is, and Tadra was very right, we do not do any criminal representation. We're not trial attorneys, we're not appeal attorneys, but sometimes appellate attorneys will have a case that's on appeal. There's a question of law that we feel it's important to chime in on to educate the court. So if we're asked by the appellate attorney, we will present an amicus brief to the court that just tries to educate them on this particular aspect of disability law and why we feel, one side should win out. So our work includes jails, local detention facilities, and state prisons. For those of you maybe not familiar, those words are not synonymous. Jails are the local detention facilities where folks go pre-trial, that are held on bond, or maybe they didn't get bond. And the prisons are, after those folks are convicted, they are moved into the state prisons. The main difference is the jails completely run by the counties. There are some very bare minimum DHHS regulations that jails have to follow that we'll get into in a little bit. And the prisons are actually run by DPS in a sort of statewide hierarchical structure. So the jails are sort of their own thing in all the counties, but the state prisons are all run by a statewide agency. We have the task of not only doing all the advocacy I talked about, but trying to monitor approximately the 100 jail facilities and 55 prison facilities for safety and ADA compliance. As you might guess, there are two of us. We do have some methods to try and target where we really think the worst conditions are, and sort of make ourselves as useful as we can there. So today I'm sort of going to try and take y'all on a bit of a crash course through sort of what the steps in the system are for somebody who is actually moving through it, and identify some of the problems that we see in those particular parts of the criminal justice system, and what we're trying to do to correct it and to try and make the whole system more humane for folks with disabilities. So the initial police interaction in pretrial detention is the first thing. This is most people's first sort of interaction with the criminal justice system happens when they come into contact with police. And the issue that we are seeing is that people with disabilities, especially mental illness and substance use issues, are hugely more at risk than the regular population to have violent encounters and to be killed in police encounters. And you can see the statistics there on the PowerPoint. So we are trying to create just safer interactions with police and folks with disabilities, really in two key ways. And the first is encouraging crisis intervention training for officers. This is special training that officers will get to respond to mental health crises and situations, really focuses on de-escalation and also access to treatment, really trying to divert people. When we say divert, we mean they were on track to head to a jail, but we diverted them to other resources, meaning a place that can give them mental health care, a hospital. A lot of places have brick and mortar institutions with the Stepping Up program that we'll talk about. But basically, they don't go to jail, they go somewhere where they can get treatment, because a lot of times the reason that they interacted with the police in the first place was a manifestation of their disability. As of 2018, and I'm sure these numbers are a little bit bigger now, 40% of law enforcement officers in North Carolina were trained in some sort of crisis intervention training, as well as many of the first responders and 911 operators. What we would love to see is, what I call universal crisis intervention training, which just means that every police agency, sheriff's office in North Carolina has some sort of required crisis intervention training as part of their initial police training. So we would have every officer on the streets out there has some sort of crisis intervention training. The reason for that being, you never know who's going to get called, who's going to take the call and show up to a situation where they're going to need that training to avoid, de-escalate and avoid a violent incident. However, universal CIT is important, but we really feel that it's most effective and that we see better interactions when the officers have crisis intervention training, but the police departments also have what's called alternative response teams. Most notably and most successfully, these have sort of manifested as the STAR programs that you might have heard about in places like Colorado. So what it means is a team is created, a police department will get more funding to create a team that can respond to certain nonviolent calls involving, mental illness calls, some low-level trespassing things, and substance use calls. And the teams are not made up of armed officers, but instead are made up of mental health professionals and EMTs. The goal of this is really that you can lighten the load on a police force by diverting these calls to folks who have trained their entire lives to handle situations like these. While crisis intervention training is great, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that officers be trained as much as, say, somebody who has a social work degree or somebody who has a lot of experience in mental health treatment. So trying to get these teams out to these types of calls where they can be most effective. And the teams, of course, do have the ability, if they feel that police are actually needed, they can always call police in if necessary to control a situation. So I really love talking about the alternative response teams because it is one of the few areas in what we do where it's not a zero-sum game. I truly think that these programs are good for pretty much everyone. They help law enforcement, specifically by freeing up police resources to respond to other calls. If the 911 dispatcher knows, hey, this is a nonviolent mental health crisis call or nonviolent substance use call, okay, I can send this call over to the alternative response team. I don't need to use officers to respond to this. Those officers are then free to take other calls. Also saves a lot of money by diverting people from jails, because once somebody is booked into a jail, the jail becomes responsible for their health care. That includes mental health treatment, and of course, just the basic nature of keeping the person there and feeding them. So if you can divert folks to other places where they can get adequate care, you don't end up with so many folks in the jails. It saves the police and the county resources. It also builds community trust, especially important in communities where relationships with the police may be a little strained or potentially very hostile. Because we hear a lot that folks feel safer calling the police, calling 911, if they know that these teams are going to be sent out instead of armed officers. And how that helps is that folks hopefully will not wait as long to call. A lot of family members of these folks are the ones who call in when there is a mental health crisis happening, and folks often will wait until things have really escalated to a very sort of high tension point before calling in, police officers, because they are afraid that the police officers are going to come in. I need to use some sort of force. So we're hoping that by letting the community know, and as the community sees these response teams come out to these type of calls, they'll know, okay, I'm not calling the police on my family member. These teams are going to come. They're going to help. They're not going to be armed. They're going to be folks who are well trained in this sort of thing, and hopefully they'll call sooner so that the team can get there and de-escalate the situation. And of course, just the fact of unarmed responders means there's less likelihood of violent interaction. And of course, it helps the people who are having mental health crises or substance use crises. Jail diversions to resources are always better than any treatment options you're going to see in a jail. and it gets well-trained people on the scene quickly to make sure that the situation doesn't escalate, and that the person gets adequate care. You're seeing a lot of these types of programs pop up all across the country. All of them are getting fairly good results. The two ones that we usually point to are the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon. Now that's been around for a couple decades now, I believe. They take around 17% of the police calls that come in Eugene, and based on some reports, have saved estimated millions of dollars in doing so. And what is becoming more popular now is something called the STAR program, which is based on the CAHOOTS model. They used it in Denver to field over 700 calls in 6 months during the pilot program. And during that, they actually never needed to call in the police for backup, and they never needed to call in the police to arrest anyone. So that's, potentially 700 plus people who, instead of going to jail, actually got adequate treatment for whatever it is that got the team called out in the first place. So, if somebody has an interaction with the police, they are not diverted, but they are instead taken to jail. We enter sort of a new phase of our advocacy for them. And the issue is that often, folks with disabilities are much more likely to have an encounter that puts them in jails. You can see the statistics up there. I think most powerful is that third bullet point. NCDHHS stated that an estimated 25,000 folks end up in North Carolina jails every year with serious mental health issues. And the jails are not really equipped to deal with these types of folks. You'll hear both police officers and advocates. One of the few things that we tend to agree on is that jails have become the new de facto mental health treatment centers for a lot of communities. So part of what we do is try and advocate to make the jails safe for people with mental illness who end up in the jails. And that's both conditions of confinement and also getting adequate and proper mental health care. And you can see the problem. Part of what we do to monitor this is we monitor North Carolina death and suicide rates. And as you can see, we are above the average nationally, and both our total deaths and our suicides have gone up fairly significantly each year since 2017, when we started keeping track of these yearly totals. So we both monitor jail deaths, and we monitor and try and encourage jails to comply with DHHS jail regulations. One of the only sort of statewide standards for jails that jails need to meet are DHHS, and specifically the Division of Health Services Regulation standards. So administrative standards that they need to meet, that jails are inspected biannually to see if they are up to par with. And we recently, and I say we taking a little bit of undue credit because it was actually a process that started years before I started at DRNC. We worked with a number of other advocacy agencies to get much needed updates to these regulations. The regulations hadn't been updated since 1991, I want to say. So we fought very hard and ended up ultimately getting a lot of very important updates that made these jails, and we're hoping will make these jails a lot safer. They went into effect in the latter part of last year. So we are really trying to make sure that jails are bringing their facilities up to these new standards. Some of the most important ones were enhanced screening upon entry. Again, a lot of folks, when they go into these jails, they're in active mental health crisis or substance use crisis. They may be completely undiagnosed depending on the communities they're coming from. So screening is incredibly important, especially for things like suicide risk of overdose and withdrawal, and identifying disabilities and health needs. The updated rules also require more robust suicide prevention plans. The jails have them to try and sort of stem the rise in suicides that we're seeing year after year. And they also require routine medical care. And they specifically mention medical care for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, mental health care, and substance use disorders. Another part of what we do is try and curb jail overcrowding. So part of those updates to the jail rules included some more strict restrictions on how many people the county can put in a jail at any given time, and whether or not, and what they have to do when they go over their stated capacity. So this is and continues to be an issue. According to the School of Government, you've got a large percentage of reporting counties averaging above capacity every year. In 2019, 9 counties reported being over capacity for every single monthly report that they turned in, and 21 were over capacity for half or more of their monthly reports. So that is a lot of county jails that are over capacity. And by that, I mean they're over 100% of the folks that they are allowed to have in their jails. And as you can see up top, corrections experts pretty much across the board agree that once a jail or a correction facility hits 80% capacity, it starts to become dangerous. Reason for that is you start to have staffing issues. You start to not be able to properly classify folks when they're coming in. It just becomes unsafe for everyone involved, and that includes jail staff. So we are trying to encourage enforcement of these updated jail regulations and to help jails come into compliance with new regulations, both on overcrowding and all of the steps forward we made with the medical care and with screening. Other things that we help, especially at the individual level with folks in jails, access to sufficient medical care, access to adequate medication in the jails is often something that we need to contact jails to make sure that they're doing. If folks need it, oftentimes we will advocate for transfer from the jail to a hospital or a better equipped DPS facility. A lot of the jails, especially in the smaller counties, simply are not equipped to deal with high acuity needs from folks with disabilities. And so there are times when we will advocate that they're either transferred to a local hospital facility or a DPS facility like Central Prison in Raleigh that actually has a functioning hospital and enough medical, basically staff and resources to make sure people get the care that they need. We are also advocating for medically assisted treatment in jails. North Carolina DHHS has done a big push over the last couple of years to try and get medically assisted treatment sort of treated as the gold standard for opioid addiction. Why we think it's important that jails across really North Carolina have and allow medically assisted treatment to occur in the jails and provide resources so that it can happen is because a lot of people entering jails are forced off their routine MAT treatment. And that really has very deleterious effects on their health, on their recovery that they're trying to enact. A lot of these medications that help with MAT need to be administered daily, weekly. And so going off it for even a little bit really has horrible effects. There are several promising pilot programs in North Carolina to provide MAT in local jails. And we're also seeing and have seen over the last couple of years increased funding sources that jails and local counties can use if they want to start these programs. And we're very much working with DHHS and any local jails that will listen to us to try and get these MAT programs in their jails. So after somebody, spends some time in jail, whether they go to trial or whatever happens in their criminal case, if they are convicted, they will go to a DPS run state prison. And the first thing that's going to probably happen is they'll go through the intake process, which involves screening for several different things, including medical issues and disabilities. And problems we're seeing here is that mental health, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and other disabilities are being underdiagnosed, sometimes extremely so. And this is a big problem because once you are screened, whatever that screening document says, that is what's going to determine the care that you get, the resources that you get, and the accommodations that you get for your entire DPS stay. Once that diagnosis has been made, it is very hard to change. And often, both the DPS screening tools are sometimes inadequate to identify folks who have these needs, and that is only compounded by the fact that a lot of folks entering these facilities may have been undiagnosed or underdiagnosed in their communities, which just complicates things even further. And often their disability might make it such that they have difficulty advocating for themselves, especially within the prison system, which can have some fairly complex bureaucratic rules about how to properly, say, make a sick call or request medication or request a doctor's visit, things like that. So we advocate for enhanced screening, especially for intellectual developmental disabilities. DPS's sheer numbers of folks who they identify as having IDD are so far below what we know sort of the national rate is, that it's pretty clear that they are doing a poor job at screening for these folks. In 2019, they reported there were only 250 people with IDD in a population that was then 35,000, so that's 0.7% is the rates they were getting. We know nationally the rates are more around 3%. So they're pretty drastically underdiagnosing folks who are coming into their facility. And this is problematic because, as I said, people with IDD, they need increased accommodations. But if the screening doesn't catch them and they're unable to advocate for themselves, they're not going to get those accommodations. So we're really trying, as much as we can help folks with IDD who reach out to us, or family members of folks with IDD who reach out to us on an individual level, it really does, we need to see some changes in the screening processes so that we can identify folks who need these accommodations and get the accommodations to them. We're also advocating pretty hard right now for the use of a new tool that can identify traumatic brain injury in folks who are coming into the prisons. TBI significantly, depending on the severity, can significantly affect your behavior. Those manifestations often result in the use of disciplinary punishments in the prison system. And if the person doesn't have that traumatic brain injury diagnosis, often that means that instead of getting treatment or the behavior being seen as a manifestation of a disability, it's just seen as a disciplinary infraction that can land folks in solitary, get their prison assignments for jobs taken away, things like that. And we're lucky because recently, and I believe it was University of Ohio, developed a written screening tool for TBI, which is great. There was not a good screening tool for it before, but now we have one that's fairly well proven, and we're really trying to get DPS to start using it in all of their intake facilities to try and screen these and find these folks so we can get them their proper accommodations. So once folks are in, you have the access and accommodations portion of our advocacy that happens in the prisons. Access to adequate communications is a really big thing for us. DPS is always going to be about 10 to 15 years technologically behind where everyone else is. A good example is they still use and exclusively use TTY machines for folks who have hearing disabilities. That is quickly becoming an obsolete technology, and there are several companies who can create systems that would allow those folks much better access to communication. And so that's just one example of us trying to advocate for proper accommodations when it comes to communications. Another huge thing we deal with is access to adequate medical care, including mental health care. So that's anything from, if we go on a monitoring trip to a prison, advocating for the use of best practices, trying to figure out where folks are falling through the cracks with their medical care. We also, and again here I say we, I think credit goes mostly to my colleague Susan Pollitt, but advocated for the creation of therapeutic diversion units. So these units are meant to allow folks with mental illness to transfer from what we call long-term segregation, which is DPS's word for basically solitary confinement, into these therapeutic diversion units, where they will get much more, not only mental health care, but programming that's supposed to be designed to help them transition off of that long-term segregation and back into the regular population. We also successfully advocated for the end of solitary confinement for juveniles, and that was through DPS policy change. So that's another way that we try and advocate. We don't always see eye to eye with DPS. I would say often we don't see eye to eye, but every once in a while, we do find areas where we can agree. And Susan was very effective in getting the previous commissioner to really see the need to end solitary confinement for the juveniles that DPS had in their custody. And of course, a big thing that we do is just make sure that folks are getting their ADA required sentence credits and job assignments. So the way the sentencing system works, if you've got a job or a job assignment, you start to get days for good time off of your sentence. problem is a lot of folks with disabilities are seen as not being able to perform these job requirements, when in reality, they just need an adequate accommodation. We either try and help them get that, or if they are, truly unable to do any of the jobs that are present in the prison, they are supposed to get, the ADA requires that they actually get those sentencing credits anyway. And so we try and help those folks get the proper accommodations to make sure that they're not staying in prison any longer just because they have a disability and are seen as not being able to do these job assignments that they usually can easily do with the appropriate accommodations. All right, there we go. So another big issue that we deal with is the use of long-term solitary confinement. By that I mean there are almost always between 2,500 and 3,000 folks in DPS prisons who are kept in their single cells for 23 to 24 hours a day. They eat in their cells, they have minimal human contact, they recreate on their own, sometimes while restrained, often not even outside, just in sort of steel cages that are a little bit bigger than their cells. There is significant psychological research and legal precedent that shows that solitary confinement, basically for more than 15 consecutive days, is a form of torture. It intensifies any current mental issues that folks tend to have, and in many cases, it really creates mental issues for folks. Even folks who maybe didn't have a diagnosis before tend to just mentally decompensate when they are kept in these just increasingly solitary conditions and not given any human interaction. And current research shows that there are actual physical changes in the brain that can occur from long-term solitary confinement. So that's the problem. Part of what we are trying to do is end that. We're taking sort of several different paths to it. We advocated when the governor's task force for racial equity was considering DPS, their disciplinary system, and their use of solitary. We advocated that they adopt international standards called the Mandela Standards for the use of long-term solitary, which essentially says it should not be used for more than 50 consecutive days, and folks who are particularly at risk to be harmed by it, it shouldn't be used on them at all. We were successful. The task force recommended solitary confinement be ended for folks under 21, people who are pregnant, people with diagnosed serious mental illness, disability, or substance use disorder, indefinite periods of time and periods for more than 15 consecutive days. We are very, very happy that they went that strong with their recommendation against the use of solitary confinement, and we are now advocating for the adoption of that recommendation. We are hopeful that the governor or potentially the legislature will take up this issue and just outright ban the practice by taking up the task force recommendations. We are also working with a national agency called Unlock the Box to create basically a public relations campaign to, one, let people know about this issue and how harmful it is for these folks, and to ultimately try and end long-term solitary in North Carolina. So after someone serves their sentence in DPS, they go into the post-release stage where they rejoin their community. And this happens for about 20,000 people each year. DPS releases around 20,000 folks from their jail. A large number of people when you consider that DPS usually has between 25 and 30,000 people in their jails at any given, or excuse me, in their prisons at any given time. So successful reentry it's crucial to reducing recidivism and really crucial just to making sure that folks have adequate supports to rejoin society. We try very hard to make sure that if people really want to try and successfully re-enter, which the vast majority do, that they have the resources there to do it. The problem is that a lot of folks do not get the proper resources they're supposed to. They don't get things like, planning visits with social workers or creating a reentry plan that they're supposed to get while they're still in DPS custody, but immediately before release. And when they come out, often, the resources that are there, either the people aren't linked up with them, or they're simply not able to for whatever reason. And another problem that we see is we do see some folks coming straight from long stretches in solitary confinement straight out back into the community, which is just an incredibly jarring and really arguably sort of dangerous practices. The person doesn't have, those social skills, and they need the, accommodations, resources. Ideally, they would be stepped down from solitary confinement into the regular population before released. But again, a lot of times we simply do not see that happening, and that's really harmful for the person being released, and their chances at successfully rejoining their community. So some of the things we do is we try to assist folks who will contact us and just need local resources, agencies that'll help with housing and job placement, things like that. We keep a very long spreadsheet of local reentry agencies statewide. We are also working with local forensic peer support groups. Forensic peer support is basically groups of folks who have been for some stretch of time incarcerated in DPS facilities or jails. They have gotten out. They decided they want to help folks who are still incarcerated or who are trying to rejoin the community. They take pretty significant training courses and are then forensic peer support advocates, usually working for the Peer Resource Network. And what that helps us do is both identify places in the system where folks can fall through the cracks, especially with reentry. And it also just keeps our policies informed by people who have lived experience in these systems that we're trying to change. As I said, we're really trying to work to end the practice of direct release from solitary conditions, and trying to ensure people get the resources that they are supposed to get, both immediately before their release and after. One specific program that we are actually just started is our NCID program. A lot of folks, when they leave prisons, don't have a valid driver's license. They don't have any sort of identification, and that makes it really impossible to do any of the things that you are supposed to do to have a successful reentry into society. You can't find housing without an ID. You can't find a job often. You can't open a bank account. There are myriad different things that you simply can't do if you don't have an ID. So we saw a need for sort of a statewide effort to try and get folks the IDs. It started out as we were going to just open up a phone line, folks could call in, we would help them navigate the system, we would help them maybe pay for some fees to get the documentation that they needed, help them gather the required documents, work with local agencies so they could do that, things like that. We certainly are still doing that, but it became very clear pretty quickly that the system itself really needed to change. Folks were running into these pretty ridiculous catch-22 barriers, such as birth certificate is often needed to get a North Carolina state ID. However, to get a birth certificate, if you can't find yours, you need a valid photo ID. So if you don't have either of those things, then you can't get either of those things. So we're also working in coalition with several other agencies to try and advocate for DPS and the DMV policy changes that will remove these barriers. And it really is a particularly sort of cruel thing where folks come out, the vast majority of them are going to be on post-release supervision, meaning they have a parole officer or somebody supervising them. The state knows who these folks are. They know where they live, they know extensive background history is on them. They know their phone numbers, everything like that, because that's what being on post-release supervision means. But then when these folks, try and really buy in and really try and rejoin the communities, they try and do, be successful in their reentry, suddenly they come up against this huge barrier where the DMV is saying, well, you have to prove just who you are. So the state knows enough about them to have incarcerated them and to keep them on post-release supervision, but then they go to the DMV and the DMV says, well, we don't know who you are, and you have to find all this documentation you may or may not have before we'll get you this sort of crucial thing that you need to successfully reenter. So that is a very broad overview of everything that we do. My contact info is right here in case anybody has any questions or anything, and I will shamelessly plug our ID project again. That number is a number you can call to leave a message if you or someone you know needs help, has been incarcerated in a DPS facility and needs help getting an ID. You can also email that ncid.project@disabilityrightsnc.org, and someone will get back to you, and we really do try and get back to you promptly, and we will take everybody. The only requirement is that the person who we're trying to help has recently left a DPS facility and needs a state ID. So I'm not, if someone can, I guess, read me the questions, or maybe I can stop
Luke,
sharing.
I do have some questions in the chat for you.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
first one is, do you train adult protective service workers in CIT?
So we do not, and if I could come off of screen sharing view, I'm not sure
At the
how to do
top,
that.
in the orange button, hit stop sharing. There you go. And we're not hearing you now, Luke. You may need to unmute your.
Sorry, we don't do CIT training ourselves. We are in touch with several organizations that do CIT training, and try and connect local law enforcement officers. With that, it's honestly a fairly big and popular push right now. So often, law enforcement officers or organizations know where to go to get their CIT training, and it's fairly easy to contact.
Gotcha.
Those organizations, we could certainly help any law enforcement agency who wanted a reference for CIT training folks, but we don't do the training ourselves.
And the next question says, is there a list of STAR providers or contact numbers for each county that can be made available to local protective service staff?
So as of right now, there is a sort of individualized push in several counties to create these sort of alternative response teams. They're not the same in every county, and every county doesn't follow the STAR model. I know there is currently a bill in the legislature, which we are trying to support, that would give funding to, I believe, Charlotte, Greensville, and Greensboro police departments to start these sort of programs. Whether or not there is a program, an alternative response program in a county, is going to be county by county. It'll change. And I will say many of them don't have one, or at least don't have one that is as robust as we like to see. I do not know if the way I've seen the STAR model work is that it is a 911 sort of referral. So in order to activate the alternative response teams, someone would call 911. They would have a certain, the call would get classified as a certain type of call that the STAR team could respond to, and the STAR team would be notified. I have never heard of, folks contacting the STAR team sort of directly, at least in the STAR model, but that is something that I can check up on and get back to you all with. It just really depends on how the particular county decides to structure their program.
Okay. The next question is asking, is there a legislative agenda or any bills being pushed right now in relation to the Rethinking Guardianship stakeholder goals?
Questions on sort of guardianship, I would have to, none that I know of, but I would have to refer to Larkin for all things guardianship related. Criminal justice team doesn't really deal with too much guardianship. The things that come across our desks are really all the bills related with criminal justice, DPS, things like that.
Okay. And that's the last question I have in the chat area. A wonderful job. Laura Cockman, do you want to take it back over? And
Yes,
final
thank you,
comment?
Kelly. Thank you all for the great questions, and thank you presenters for all the great information. I think it'll be really helpful to folks trying to work in the counties throughout the state. It's great information. We're going to take a 10-minute break now. So if you will be back at 11:29, we'll continue. Thank you so much. 10-minute break.
Laura,
Hey, John, how are you?
doing well. Hope you are.
Doing fine.
Yeah. Everything going well in your world?
Well, as well as can be expected, I guess, at this point. How are things with you? Y'all kind of settling into
Yeah.
being normal life again, or?
Yeah, whatever that is now.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's starting to emerge a little bit. I had my first live presentation since February a year ago. Last week, I went down to Charlotte and did an event there. So it was nice. It was nice to get out on the road. I don't miss the drive going to and from Charlotte.
No.
So in that respect, these WebExes are much more convenient and
Yeah.
easier to do. But I guess I have a little bit of performance blood in me, and I like getting out and talking with people and doing things live. So I know Stephanie's been out for quite some time now. She's been doing a lot of live events.
Okay.
So she's been doing sooner than I did. So and I think she and Anne and Mercedes, I think they have a virtual scam jam almost immediately after this, so they may actually have to cut out a little early to get to that. But
And Ann has already stepped off. I think she maybe already have stepped off. She said at 11:30, and Stephanie is on still. I've made her presenter, but I don't see that she's got her phone or voice connected to the call. So
oh, there she is. Hey, Stephanie.
Stephanie, we can't hear you. You're not connected by voice or audio.
I see your video now, Steph, but I don't hear you. Click your unmute at the bottom.
Yep. Now I think I can probably unmute you, Stephanie. Well, I thought I could. Here we go. Whoops. I may have muted everybody, but unmute Stephanie. Stephanie, now talk.
Can you hear me, Kevin?
We can. Go ahead.
But I feel like it's echoey.
Just turn your sound down in the bottom right corner.
Okay.
How you doing, Stephanie?
Good.
Laura, I see it's 11:30. Do you want to unmute and start back?
I think I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
There you go. Yes, go ahead.
All right. All right. It's time to get back together. Thank you all so much for your attention and joining us this morning. Would like to now go over some committee reports. The first one is the Education Committee. And I believe Ann has had to leave us, but Tadra, you're still there, I think. Do you have any updates for us?
Yes, can you see me? Okay. Yes, I do. And it's about our September the 15th for the general meeting presentation. And that will be, I think Chevelle is going to do that one. And the title is Ignoring It Is Not an Option. Mental illness and addiction among the elderly are a growing problem, but worth tackling. So, and during this session, Chevelle, who's a certified mental health first aid for older adults with later life issues instructor and a mental health, first aid for instructor, will describe the nature and extent of the problem, why we must address it, and how we can recognize and act to remediate it, both directly and through referrals.
Thank you, Tadra. We look forward to that presentation for sure. Advocacy Committee, Nancy Warren, any updates?
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Thank you for hanging with us this morning. Wow, what a mindful I got, Tadra. I learned a lot today, so thank you very much. Advocacy, we continue to work with all our colleagues around funding and legislation. We're still active member of the Coalition on Aging. We're still an active member of the national organization that represents state elder justice coalitions. We're waiting to hear about the governor's budget, which has money. But, I think the biggest thing that everyone at the local level and certainly at the Division of Aging and Adult Services is dealing with is the enormous influx of federal dollars for adult protective services. So that is something that our adult protective services system has not really ever had to deal with before. All these federal dollars that are coming to support local adult protective services programs from the federal government. So we're keeping an eye on all of that and trying to help and stay engaged with aging and adult services through regular meetings. We're doing a lot of advocacy work at that level as well. So yeah, so that's where we're at.
Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it. All right, Awareness Committee, John Marin and Stephanie Bias. Y'all have anything for us?
Stephanie, I will defer to you. Can't hear you.
Okay.
There you go.
Hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Feel like the Verizon commercial or whatever, Sprint, whatever it was. Hey everybody, happy summer. Things are starting to pick back up, as John has shared. He did his first live and in person yesterday or this last week in the great state of Mecklenburg and Charlotte to the Kiwanis Club. I've spoken to that group before, and they're a great group, and I'm glad that you were able to go down and fight that traffic between Salisbury and Charlotte. It's a bear. Thankfully, I don't live there anymore. But anyway, like Raleigh's not a bear in their traffic. But we are out on the road going to certain events and doing things in person with the audience that I particularly deal with as a senior audience. And, they do well virtual with some things, but really in presentations, face-to-face is good. I actually have done several of those face-to-face, but just went last week to Onslow County to a little area called Belgrade. And this crowd in this metal building is always in the middle of a cornfield, is always happy to see me when I come. And when I walked in, I hadn't seen those folks since 2019, in the spring of 2019. And when I walked in the door, they said, "Where you been? We're glad to see you. And what'd you bring us?" I mean, so you're always out there. They were always interested to tell me what the latest scams that they had encountered during the pandemic. I mean, they were loaded for bear. They knew that I was coming, and they were prepared. And, they just said, "I don't understand why we can't do something about some of these people calling on the telephone." So that, we just told them the ways to protect themselves and don't be the good Southern person that you have been raised to be. Hang up that telephone. They start asking your personal information, if you didn't initiate the call. Actually, while I was sitting on the conference presentations this morning, which were excellent, and thank you to Tadra and the crowd from Disability Rights and for Larkin and her team as well. It's just been great information. I'm sorry, Britney Spears is in a mess, but what can we say? Be quiet, John. But anyway, I'd say this anyway. But it is interesting because I had 4 telephone calls as we were sitting here that came up as SECU and then State Employees Credit Union with like 4 little digits after it was over, and I knew that wasn't the credit union. So somebody is even spoofing that. But what would a person that is of I'm not saying diminished capacity. What if anybody just thought, "Oh, well, that's the credit union. I've got to talk with him. Maybe someone has hacked my account," which is notorious. I've had that happen. So I didn't call them back. I wasn't going to mess with them. But if they would ask them for their information, they would give that information out to those folks. And that is a huge form of neglect and abuse, and really of the isolation that we have seen that has happened during this pandemic. And we pray that it is over, or on the way to being over, but I don't know. People need to take these lessons that they have learned during this pandemic about social isolation and how not to give your information out to these people over the telephone, and to be a smart and savvy consumer of their own rights, and take it, whether we have another case of COVID or any variant at all. We need to take that to heart and just pretend like we have it all the time, to guard your information, because, you know, a lot of times we can't get that money or those benefits or whatever back to those folks if we don't know it, or if they aren't aware of it until something happens. So we just appreciate the partnership, and we're out doing our deal. We're going to do a deal again with Upper Coast Plains Council of Governments, doing a meeting afternoon scam jam virtually on GoToMeetings at we're going to go on about 1:30. So John and I continue to update folks at the Consumer Fraud Task Force as well about the things that go on.
Yeah, and thank you for handling that for me. And I've got the Ann Elmore prepared the minutes from that,
Good.
and I will send those out this afternoon as well from that. One quick thing I want to mention is just give you all yet another update, I guess, on the Helpful project that we're working with. We recently found out that the people behind the platform, the developers, have now made it possible for APS offices to make referrals, enter referrals that come into them from outside of the platform. In other words, from the community. The way the portal was originally designed, it was the financial institutions would make the reports to APS and to us, securities regulator. Now, APS offices have the ability to input their own case referrals and to send out to people like us. We're still working with the project team on, trying to bring on the Conference of District Attorneys so that they can be a part of this as well. I think law enforcement is maybe going to be a part of it as well at some point, obviously. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service is now part of the portal so that reports can go to them as well. So it's an evolutionary process. It's working. It's working its way, and I think there's going to be some more good coming out of all of this. Ann and I continue to be proactive in reaching out to local individual APS offices to kind of, again, sort of brief them on the portal and how it all works, what our office can do, in regards to some of the types of cases that they have. So we're just still, that's kind of our focus right now. So yes, Nancy.
Yeah, John, did you all put in a proposal for a workshop at the National Adult Protective Services Association conference?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No, that's unfortunate.
Well, I mean, it may be that the project team is doing that. I'm just not aware of it, or didn't focus on it. I don't know. When is the conference? Do you know offhand?
Maybe November. I can't think right.
I can check to see.
It is, yeah. But they've been accepting proposals for a while now. I just, it's just, I hope they're, because I think that's pretty significant that, that referral process, the exchange, that whole way of doing business.
I'll mention it. I'll mention it to them and see if they're aware of it. They may be doing something. I just don't know.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's all I got.
Next up is our Communications Committee, which is Laura Slobach, Autumn Cox, and Allison Crossman. Autumn, have you all got anything for us?
Yeah, so I just posted a link to our website in the chat. And so the PowerPoints from today have been uploaded, as well as an additional handout about guardianship. So those are for your viewing pleasure as you get time, and they'll be up there. if you go to our homepage, that's where you'll be able to view it at. But if you go under the meetings tab, you'll be able to see past meetings, PowerPoint presentations, all of that is still up there. And so we keep all of that. So if there's ever anything that you need to come back and reference, make sure you keep our website handy. The other thing is, again, just want to reiterate and welcome Allison to the communications committee. So we're excited to have her. So that's all I have, unless if Laura or Allison have anything else. Thank you.
I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Autumn, and welcome.
Great. All right, membership committee, Kevin.
Hey, this is Kevin. I just wanted to remind everybody that don't forget to send in your dues. Pam Palmer is, she's really standing behind me, looking at me, telling everyone to send in your dues as quick as possible. And you do have the two options. There is the PayPal option, and then you can mail it in as well. Even though Pam has moved to another state, Laura Slobach and I have been working on getting checking the post office box and making sure we stay up to date with that, and getting everything into Pam and helping making deposits as we can. But other than that, we hope you encourage others to join our membership. I think, as many of you saw from the conference, we had an amazing conference, and we could not put that on without having members and being able to include everyone in that. And I just want to again welcome Allison to the board as well.
Great, thank you. All right, now it's time for member updates. Do any of the participants on the call have any news they'd like to share? If you'll put it in the chat box, Kevin will make sure we get access to you.
I can unmute you. If you just put a note in the chat box real quick, I can unmute you so you can speak. Or if you want to type your update in the chat feature, we can read it for you. So, does any of the board members that have the ability to unmute, if y'all have any messages that you would like to, if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead while we're waiting for others to chat in. Okay, at this time, Laura, I'm still not seeing any messages in the chat box.
Okay, well, we'll assume that everybody has their updates provided. And if we can have a motion to join the meeting.
I will make that motion.
All right, John and Stephanie second. Thank you all so much for attending. Remember that our next meeting is at 9:30 on Wednesday, September 25th. September 15th. And Chevelle Mavens will be our speaker. See you all then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Have a good day.